nation's six largest banks together before the committee. Over a century ago, Louis Brandeis wrote about the concentration of corporate power and how it distorts the market. He called his book Other People's Money and How the Bankers Use It. It's a subject Americans continue to have a stake in, how you, the nation's largest financial institutions, use other people's money. You are the six most powerful business leaders in this country. Your decisions affect the lives of millions of Americans, their paychecks, their opportunities, their retirement savings. And your power is so much greater than that of your predecessors 30, 40, 50 years ago. Look what's happened to our country during that time. Profits have gone up, stock prices have soared, your own compensation is stratospheric, but workers are getting a smaller and smaller share of the wealth they create, and they're working harder than ever. We have a racial wealth and income gap that's barely budged since we passed the Civil Rights Act. In the aftermath of the 2008 Great Recession, where millions lost their jobs, Wall Street still made record profits. In a pandemic where 500,000 Americans died, we had the highest unemployment since the Great Depression. Wall Street still made record profits. I sense a pattern. Like most Americans, I want businesses to make money. I don't mind that bankers are rich. Some people are going to be wealthy. That's fine with me. Here's the problem, though. Under the current system, Wall Street profits no matter what happens to workers because those profits now come at the expense of workers. Your banks are the ones that largely built that system. We often hear about the invisible hand, but the economy isn't physics. It's not governed by scientific laws outside our control. It's made up of people making choices about our values and about the society we want to live in. The invisible hand doesn't lay off workers. The invisible hand didn't invent credit default swaps. The invisible hand doesn't decide to invest in private equity firms that buy up mobile home parks in Iowa and across the country and then jack up the rent. Your banks, your lobbyists, your fellow CEOs at some of the largest companies in America, you make those choices that dictate how our economy works. Wall Street built this system. They didn't build it for everyone. They built it for themselves. When companies lay people off, when they move jobs to low-wage countries, when they cut paychecks, when they bust unions, when they subcontract work to lower-paying companies with fewer benefits, when all that is done, Wall Street analysts yell, buy, buy, buy. And what you do sends a signal to every other company. If businesses want investment, they emulate you. They know they won't attract investment unless they repurpose all their funds into short-term profits for shareholders. As you all know, it's not when you started in your businesses, it's not always been like this. When I was growing up, the CEO to median worker pay ratio was 20-1. That was pretty good money and a pretty good lifestyle for management, as it should have been. Today, that ratio is closer to 320-1. From the mid-20th century through the early 80s, the financial sector made up 10 to 15% of corporate profits. Today, it's 25%, yet it makes up only 4% of jobs. A few decades ago, a majority of Wall Street capital funded the real economy, wages, machinery, research, new construction. Today, much of that capital goes to stock buybacks and dividends and complex financial instruments. Only about 15% goes to the real economy. Instead of investing in businesses that actually make things or provide useful services and that create real jobs in towns all over the country, companies spend billions buying back stocks and handing out CEO bonuses. Stock buybacks used to be illegal market manipulation. Today, they're routine. Wall Street centrists, Main Street centrists no longer match up. The current system treats workers as a cost to be minimized instead of the engine behind our success. Look what's happened in places like where I grew up in Mansfield, Ohio. Jobs shipped overseas to countries where companies can pay workers less. Declining union membership by design. Crumbling roads, shuttered storefronts, workers forced to choose between a hometown they love and leaving in search of opportunity. And that was before 2008. You know what happened to Americans then? In Congress and too many in Washington have been willing accomplices. Tax break after tax break, gutting consumer protections, trade deals written by corporate lobbyists. So I come back to this. There's a reason towns across the country like Mansfield look the way they do. It's because our economy is no longer about workers and communities and real investment in both of these. The six of you before us today are the most powerful economic titans in our country. Your banks, the systems they built and uphold, bear some responsibility. At the end of last month, we held our first ever worker listening session. We heard from workers from all kinds of backgrounds, working all kinds of jobs, including as a former teller at one of your banks. They talked about wage theft, about being laid off during a pandemic with no severance, about how dangerous their workplaces could be, about how companies busted their unions. There's a common thread through their stories. Their hard work simply doesn't pay off, certainly not the way yours does. Pamela Garrison, a worker for said something that stuck with me. Working poor, she said, working poor are two words that shouldn't go together. I know you can't snap your fingers and fix all these workers' problems, but you also can't tell me the decisions you make have no effect on the factors that determine their job opportunities and their wages. And yes, I know you work hard too. We all do. Work's something that unites all of us. We're all trying to do something productive for our families, for our businesses, and yes, for our communities and our country. Here's the difference though. For most people, no matter how hard they work, if one thing goes wrong in their lives, they get in a car accident, the plant where they work shut down, their spouse gets sick, they're on their own. They don't get a taxpayer bailout. They all remember that Wall Street did. And it hasn't only been the bailouts. No one can deny that this nation has been good to the financial industry. Deposit insurance, the federal payment systems, the whole financial infrastructure you all rely on. But your banks haven't held up your end of the deal. As far as I can tell, you haven't at all rethought this Wall Street system, building short-term profits at the expense of long-term growth for everyone. In fact, you continue to perpetuate it. Wall Street gets second chance after second chance. Most workers don't even get one. It's past time for the financial industry to be as good to the American people as the nation has been to you, the financial industry. The purpose of today's hearing is to show Americans their government's finally looking out for them, that we understand this economic system has betrayed millions of workers that holds our country back. Here's what we want to hear from you today. What are you and the companies you run going to do, not just say, but actually do to change? We want to hear what Congress has to change the incentives of Wall Street, to reward work instead of just rewarding wealth, to pay for and work to undo the damage that Wall Street has done and continues to do to communities of color, to stop investing in corporations that fuel climate change, threatening people's communities and livelihoods, to channel your vast resources into businesses that employ actual people in cities and towns.
No, hang on, baby
girl.
girl.
Hometown of Mansfield, Ohio, to my mother's hometown of Mansfield, Georgia, to invest in our country's greatest asset, the American people. I've heard many of you argue you don't need government rules forcing you to make changes to your business model. So today, show us some proof. Prove to us that you're going to use your positions to change the Wall Street system.
No, just a second. Can you take Caleb the park?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Can you take Caleb the park?